Happy Tuesday, last day of February here for NCAA men's basketball fans. Welcome to the TrogCast, two really old guys talking college basketball. That's Jim Reaker and Jeff Zink here. Jim, how you doing on this rather wet morning?
I'm doing wonderful. Last day of February. March starts tomorrow. The madness starts this week for the smaller conferences. It's a great time to be an American. Get us a little bit off all this. I got to quit watching this political stuff. Let's focus on sports where we can have some fun.
Yeah. Well, as you say, we'll be talking about one of the things we'll be talking about are those conference tournaments, a little bit more about how they affect how things go into the NCAA tournament. I'm sure you'll have something to stump me on. But before we get to that, if the fans didn't listen to the Razorcast on Thursday, I have to apologize. I was totally embarrassed. I felt like the kid who showed up in the classroom didn't have his homework done or was late for the final exam. I let it slip. Although on the fly, I came up with something, but it wasn't planned. I felt bad. So I'm going to make up for it today. Yeah, it wasn't your typical 9-part labyrinth leading to dead ends, get out the dusty material, but it was still a good one. Who would have known that was the anniversary of the Cincinnati Garden? But let's talk a little bit about this last week of conference play. Short week because most everything will be done on Sunday, only short by a day, and conference tournaments for the big tournaments start next week. A lot of little ones start this week, but we got some important things going on here. Of course, we've got a new number one in Kansas. That's our sixth number one now in a 17-week season. Gonzaga losing and dropping to number 4. A lot of things happened last week. What's turning out to be a typical week here in the NCAA, 14 of last week's top 25 lost, 9 of them to unranked teams as those teams are scurrying for their place in the NCAA tournament, and 5 of them lost to lesser-ranked teams, including last night's, of course, we didn't make that, 15 because UNC lost to UVA
Virginia.
last night as well. And Baylor, of course, that was close. That was 10-11 beating West Virginia at home. So a lot of scrambling going on, position for conference tournaments, seeding, which will be important for them, but more important, the conference championships. Let me give you a quick rundown and we'll let you talk about it, let everybody know what's going on in those. The ACC, North Carolina, it's pretty much because they were 2 up with 2 to play, but with their loss last night, they are only 1 up, but they do hold the tiebreaker over everybody. So they've pretty much clinched the ACC, but they'll want to go out with a victory against Duke. Some big games there in the Big Ten. Purdue's just up 1 with 2 to play, and they've got some games coming up here against the feisty Indiana team and a Northwestern team, both pushing to get in the tournament. Kansas is clinched. They're up 3 with 2 to play. But what could be interesting there, and I'm sure Jimmy will talk about it a little bit, is Iowa State is suddenly in the picture. With West Virginia's loss last night, if Iowa State can beat Oklahoma State and then somehow win in West Virginia, they'll take second place. Kentucky in the SEC is up 1 with 2 to play, and they play Vanderbilt and Texas A&M. Florida has Arkansas and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt trying to get into that NCAA picture, but unless somebody slips up there, Kentucky should have it. And in the Pac-12, Oregon and Arizona are tied with 1 to play, and Oregon's got to play, and they've got rivalry week, as they always do in the Pac-10. Oregon will play Oregon State and Arizona State. And you hope they can't slip up, even though they just barely got past Cal and Stanford this week, but Oregon does own that tiebreaker. So why don't you talk about your conferences and what you see in the last week here and who's going to end up on top?
Okay, I'll start with the Big East. Of course, as you said, Nova has clinched that, and Butler's pretty much kind of edged out. Looks like they're going to get the number 2 seed for that tournament. What the Big East big wigs got to like is after second place, there is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 team logjam. Actually, Creighton holds the game lead over Seton Hall, Providence, Xavier, and Marquette. But it'll be interesting to see if that extends the number of Big East teams that maybe make the big dance. But there's some important games to go there. Of course, Xavier and Marquette play tomorrow night. That'll be very, very important for giving one of those the advantage in that middle pack. And there are important games up and down the road. So, but I think they're going to get 5 for sure. But now they could possibly get 7. I really don't think that's going to happen, but there's a possibility. The parity that's kind of coming out here at the end of the season in the Big East is really helping their standings nationally. Any views or comments you have about the Big East?
No, we'll move on. I mean, the Big East is like I say, Villanova's locked, and everybody else is jockeying. We'll talk more about the tournament next week after we tell people how it works. So what about the Big 10 or the Big 12 for you?
Well, the Big 10, again, I go back. I picked Wisconsin to win it initially. We talked a little bit about a couple weeks ago how we thought about that, and I kind of said I thought Purdue was the one that was trending, and then they go and lose to Michigan. And Michigan and Michigan State are really trending up. Looks like they'll probably make the tournament now. But I'm still going to go with Purdue to win that and Wisconsin to finish second. And, again, of course, the story I think it's still going to happen, although they've struggled a little bit here lately, is Northwestern. I think they're still going to make the tournament. That's going to be a big story, of course, because it's the first time in their history that they will have made the tournament. And on to the Big 12, and you talked about it. Kansas has that pretty much sewed up. Again, it's going to be who's going to finish second. And, kind of a surprise, Iowa State, as those 3 teams have kind of gone head-to-head here lately, has kind of emerged as maybe the second seed. And Baylor and who else is there? Baylor and, help me out, who's West Virginia. They're probably going to – they're going to vie for 4th, and that's going to be a big tournament. And I will say this, and, of course, this changes every 2 or 3 days. There was people saying, oh, man, Duke's coming on. They're probably going to be the favorite, and then they lose. And then, hey, now I heard people talking about North Carolina. They're the one coming on, getting things together. They're going to be the favorite. Well, I'm going to say right now, on February the 28th, and it'll probably change in 2 or 3 days, that right now it looks like Kansas seems to be the team that's really starting to play well and put things together, and maybe they're the favorite. Although when I flipped over just to check, because I didn't think it would be much of a game, deep into the second half, they were down 10 points to Oklahoma at home. But, of course, they turned it around and won that game going away. So that's where my conferences stand, pretty much as we expected them at the beginning of the season. Again, in the Big Ten, Purdue's kind of trended a little bit stronger, and but, again, they lost to Michigan, which you wouldn't have expected here just recently.
Well, anytime you're in conference play, you never know what's going to happen, especially this time. You got a team like Michigan, Michigan State, those guys, they know they're going to make a push. For me, it's a big week in the Big Ten for Northwestern. Like I say, Purdue's got to play Indiana and Northwestern, and they've got to win both of those to win the regular season title, whereas both those teams are pushing hard to just get in. And then Minnesota's playing at Wisconsin on Sunday as well as Purdue at Northwestern. Those could all have tournament repercussions. So a lot of things going on as we go into this last week. And, of course, just for bragging rights, Duke goes to North Carolina on Saturday, and at the same time, Notre Dame's going to play at Louisville, and Miami's going to play at Florida State. So on that end, it all is going to be going right down to the last week, like we've said many, many times. But before I make the segue into the other tournaments and getting set up, were there any other thoughts you wanted to add?
Well, I would just add that, again, this is a crazy season, and it's going to be the craziest March, I think, because every game will be watchable because anybody can beat anybody this year. We've already proved that. In fact, BYU, you thought maybe they had a chance at Gonzaga at home, but there's no way they're going into Gonzaga and win that game on Saturday night. In fact, I had that on. I thought, I'm not watching this game. They've already beat them at their place. And again, it just proves out that this season anybody can beat anybody. The other final point I would make is the ACC is definitely the conference this year. They are the deepest, and if you look at the records there, they're going to have, I don't know, at least 8, 10 teams in the big dance. So, they definitely take the cake for the toughest conference of the year. And I would probably say right up behind them would be the Pac-12 and the Big 12, having pretty good, solid seasons by a lot of teams.
Yeah, yep. The only thing I mentioned about what you said is that this is the third straight year that BYU's gone to Gonzaga and beat them on their court, so it's never a given there. But what
you should have called me Saturday night and told me that, and then I would have watched that game. We could have.
Hey, I can't do all your homework for you, Buster. You got to be on top of these. But what affects the dance, and we'll talk about this in combination. First, let's say congratulations. There are 14 conferences that are finished, and this often happens. You can't call them weaker conferences, but the non-power conferences, I guess, 14 of them are already finished, and their tournaments will start. One of them, the Atlantic Sun, actually started last night. But let me run down the winners very, very quickly. The American East Vermont is a winner, undefeated in their conference, in 26-5. The Atlantic Sun, Florida Gulf Coast, 12-2, and they started tournament play last night. And the Big South, Winthrop won a tiebreaker over North Carolina Asheville, both at 15-3, and that tournament starts tonight. The Colonial Athletic Association, North Carolina Wilmington. As you go down this list, you're going to find out how strong basketball is in North Carolina. There's Asheville, there's Wilmington. They're starting on the 3rd. The Horizon League, Oakland, the school in Michigan, not out west, 14-4, and they'll start this week. The Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, Monmouth, who's now up to rank number 34 in the country in the AP poll. They're 18-2 in their conference, 26-5 overall. The Missouri Valley, the Wichita State. They're 17-1, and they're up in the top 25. But they tied for their conference lead with Illinois State, and I'll tell you why that's important in a little bit. Northeast Conference, Mount St. Mary's, not St. Mary's in the West, Mount St. Mary's, 14-4, only 16-15 overall. They won their conference. Belmont in the Ohio Valley Conference is 15-1. The Patriot League was won by Bucknell with a 15-3 record. The Southern Conference was won by North Carolina Greensboro. They broke the tiebreaker with East Tennessee and Furman. In the Summit Conference, your Mastodons couldn't pull off. South Dakota's the top seed there, and they're going to start their conference this weekend. Won it at 12-4. And Gonzaga is done. And in the West Coast Conference, tournament will begin this Friday, and they won it with a 17-1 record. Now, the reason this is important, and this is what we'll say, we want to say congratulations to all those teams, but they're going to know where they are, and we're also going to know how this complicates the selection process that will finalize on March 12th. And that's because, as you know, Jim, and we got another week with the big conferences and then their tournaments, and you're talking about how this conference is going to get 10 and this is going to get 7. Everybody can speculate that, but we can't know anything until we get through the conference tournaments, and this is the main reason. There are 32 conferences in the NCAA Division I. Every conference tournament champion gets the automatic bid. I don't know how many people know that, but so there's 32, so every conference has at least one team going to the NCAA.
Yeah, and here, go ahead.
Go.
Here's the statement I'm going to make, because I did look through the conferences a little bit, and you just named off the ones that are champions. Here's what I think is, of all those conference champions you just named, there are very few that I think are already in. Gonzaga, yes. I think St. Mary's, if they don't win that tournament over Gonzaga, they have a chance of being an at-large. And I think maybe Wichita State and Illinois State, if they don't win their tournament, have a good chance. You pointed out Monmouth, who I was not aware that their RPI rankings was that high. Maybe, but they got to be nervous. Because of the parity of the Big Six throughout the Big Six, I think it's going to be tougher than ever before to get an at-large bid if you're not in one of those top six. I think there's going to be very few teams that are going to get an at-large bid out of the mid-major and the low-major conferences, and it's going to be tough, and there's going to be some angry fans. But, again, I think it's because of the parity in the big conferences. So it's going to make these tournaments even more important. I think all the teams
that is what I was just saying, is tournaments are paramount. They have to win it, and to get into that, to continue to, there's 68 teams that go in. To give you an idea, I mean, there's 32 conference champions. You got 36 at large berths, and I'll walk you through in a little bit how they do it. But even if you look down the big conferences that have teams in the top, I went to the top 40: the American, the Atlantic 10, the ACC, Big 12, Big East, Big 10, Pac-12, SEC, and the West Coast. Those conferences right there have 35 teams in the top 40, and just about all of them are going to get bids. I mean, you can't – and this is what complicates it. You look at it, like you're saying, not the smaller conferences. It also comes in the bigger conferences. You've got American with SMU and Cincinnati and Houston even on the bubble. I didn't include those in the 35. But what if somebody comes out of there and wins that? Are you going to exclude Cincinnati and Southern Methodist? No, you're not. They're going to go. So that's what's going to knock out some of these teams. They're going to have to sit and wait a week. If you got 35 probable bids, and even in there, I mean, you just mentioned, that does not include a Xavier or those other teams in the Big East that you're touting. It doesn't include a South Carolina or an Arkansas in the SEC. It doesn't include any of, 5 or 6 more teams that could be considered in the ACC. So that's what is crucial when it comes to this. And like I say, there's going to be some we'll say hurt feelings, but we'll let you continue with your thoughts, and then I'll give our fans exactly how this works and how difficult it is to come up with those 68 teams.
Well, you just made me think of something. I always just talk about the Big Six, but you're right. The American, SMU, and Cincinnati both had great seasons. The A-10, I know Dayton is always there. I think ECU's there. I forgot about those, and they might be able. They might get a couple bids, but they might be lower than they've been before. I'll finish up my thoughts here. Is the selection committee has a tough job, and they're never going to make every basketball fan in America happy. And there's going to be people who think that favors are done for the Big Six or even expanded to the Big 8 or 10 conferences. That's probably true, but this is going to be the most difficult, I think, job that they've ever had this year, just because of the parity. But again, I think it's good for college basketball because I think it includes a lot more fans, and it will keep attention, again, starting actually yesterday, because you said the Atlantic Sun started their but that's good for the conferences, I think, because I think more people will pay attention to those smaller conference tournaments. They'll get more exposure. They'll get more money. They'll be on TV. So I think it's all good, but it's going to be a tough task to figure out who those 68 are.
Well, yeah, it always is. And you're saying that even in the smaller conferences, what if Wichita State doesn't win the Missouri Valley? Are you going to ignore them now that they're in the top 25? You've got a Vermont at 60. This is the hard thing. A team like Vermont, number 37 in the AP poll, they're undefeated in their conference, 16-0. But if they lose one game in their tournament, they're probably not going to go. What you were just saying, they're not going to get that secondary American East slot. A team like Belmont in the same, they're 15-1. If they don't win the Ohio Valley Conference, they're not going to go. And that's what's hard. Gonzaga, if they don't win, they're going to go. In St. Mary's, they're going to go. But what if it's BYU? Whose spot does BYU take if they win that tournament? That's what we'll know at the end of this weekend, which will affect the at-large berth for the next weekend. So let's give the fans a little bit of an idea of how the committee has to come to this. There's 10 committee members on the selection committee, and there's 351 Division I teams. Okay? So like I say, the 32 conference tournament winners get the automatic bid. Before Selection Sunday, and even before the other conference tournaments are done, those 10 members are given a ballot that has all 351 teams listed. And there's 2 columns on that ballot. In the first column, they have to mark 36 teams that they feel would qualify for an at-large berth. And again, they have to do this before, the other 18 conference tournaments might be finished. So they have to put down 36 that they feel, and then in the other column, they can mark as many teams as they want that they feel should get consideration. Okay? And then those are tallied, and once they have them, if any team gets 8 out of the 10 votes, they're in. And then that's all there is to it. And then that's when things get tough. And you never really know what all of these ballots are. Then any team that got 3 or more votes from either column is put into the consideration pool. Or if you won or shared a regular season conference championship, you're put in the consideration pool. And then sort of the way it works is if there's a list of 20 or more, each member gets to nominate 8 teams. And then they put those all together, and the top 8 teams from those 10 ballots are tallied up, and then each member votes on them from 1 to 8 as worthiness to get into the tournament. And then they tally up those votes, and whoever the top 4 of those 8 are in the best position, they're in. And then it's sort of like shampooing. It's lather, rinse, repeat. There are different numbers for lesser things, but until you get to those 68. So they've got a long day ahead of them, but they do have certain rules in front of them. And as they said, oftentimes the 68 become clearer without too much argumentation, but what's really difficult is how to seed those 68 teams, because the 1 seed usually stays geographically, the 1 and 2 seeds geographically pretty close to where they live. The 3 and 4 seeds travel, and that makes a big difference for the teams. So,
very good work, my friend. I'm just hoping you're not going to test me on that, because, again, what I take from that is, and I think a lot of our fans probably take from that, there is a method to their madness. It isn't as willy-nilly as maybe a lot of us think, that it's just, they get in a room and they talk and they talk and they talk, and then 68 emerge. And so very good work. I might have to re-listen to that part of the broadcast later so I can better understand it. But again, overall, at least I feel there's a good method there. So and you talk about the seeding going to be very, very difficult. I agree with you there. Although, and I've heard some of the talking heads say this, and I totally agree. I think probably this year, 2017, the NCAA tournament, it will be the tournament that seeding maybe matters the least. In fact, there'll be a 12-5 game probably, where 12 wins. And the way I always look at that is if you are a 12-5 and you're the 12 beating a 5, well, you pretty much take the place of the 5 seed now. You're actually like a 5 seed. So you're going to play a 4 seed probably in the next round. So I think really probably from about 4 to 11 or 12, there's going to be a lot of teams in there that could fall at any place between 4 and 12. And teams just got to worry about getting in this year and then take it a game at a time.
Well, I said, but I'll make the point again. It has more to do with geography than where you go. I mean, if you're in the, you end up a 3rd seed, and let's say, somebody like Florida ends up a 3rd or 4th seed, they may have to go to Salt Lake City to play their first round games. Versus, if they're a 1 or 2 seed, they might be in Orlando. And even though it is a neutral court, we know that there's a little bit more of a home field advantage to being closer to home and a travel advantage. You don't have to go so far. There's not time zone differences. It is very difficult, and the seeding is going to become more and more so. When people are saying, this conference is going to get this many, it really is going to depend upon how these conference tournament goes. I feel for a team like Mount St. Mary's in the Northeast, because when you look at it, they're 14-4. They're only 16-15 overall, and some fans going to look at them and go, "Oh God, they just barely squawk by it. They got a weak league. They've got 16 wins. 14 of them are in their conference, and then they tied with Long Island, Brooklyn. But this is also a team that went into conference play 1-11, but decided to take on West Virginia, Iowa State, Minnesota, Michigan, and Arkansas in their pre-conference schedule to get set up. The average fan is going to look at that and say they don't deserve it at all. And of course, now if they lose their conference tournament, they're not going to get any chance because people just don't consider that. Those are the teams I feel for that. It comes down to one bad night, and the whole season gets thrown out.
Yeah, I agree with you. And here's another point I'll make about this whole system, though, that I think where then now it becomes an advantage. If they do win an early tournament, they basically get about 12 days to prepare for that first game. And that's why I think we see so many of those upsets that we see on Thursday and Friday of that first week, because those lower-level teams playing already, they got a lot of time to rest. They got a lot of time to get ready for that very first game, whereas a high seed that they're playing might have just finished their conference tournament 3 or 4 days before, and that gives them a huge advantage. And I think that's why we see so many upsets on the first day that we don't see so much in the second round. Then the upset, everything kind of goes by seed, it seems like, in the second. You don't see that team that pulls the big upset day one come back in the next game and do it. So, they have that advantage. So it's something that we're going to have to watch.
Well, and this is what we've talked about this before. You know where I'm going. What I don't get, and I know it's exciting, 68 teams. There's 351 teams in Division I. I don't understand why they don't treat it like a lot of the high school tournaments and just let everybody in. Just adding one more weekend, you go from 64 up to 256 teams included, because you would need 128 teams. That's 64 games, and you're down to the 64. That's only 100 short. I'm sure there's a way you could devise it that only adds about a week and a half. Now, I don't want to extend the season either, but I think we could shorten the preseason conference. That's hard too, because this is where the money gets involved. They're not going to want to give up their trips to Puerto Rico and Hawaii and Alaska and all those things. But that way, everybody would be in. You don't have to worry so much about that. Of course, there's always going to be arguments about seating and distance and all that. But you're talking about, a couple extra games. It's going to work itself out, and you don't have all of this, gnashing of teeth and fiddling of hands to get with it.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate on that. I'll take the other side. Because and this would be good research. I haven't done it, but I know there are a few tournaments or a few leagues, even all the smaller ones, that there are maybe teams who finish near the very, very bottom that don't even get a chance to play in their league tournament. But most of them include almost every member. Sometimes you have to play a couple extra games. Sometimes there's usually buys for the teams who finish near the top. They're rewarded for that. Sometimes I remember the old Big East used to have the double buy if you were one of the top 4 teams. So my argument would be that really all 351, I know this isn't completely true, but really every Division I school has a chance, if they would win their tournament, their league tournament, to make it into the NCAA. And on the other side, I would argue by doing it the way that they do it, we're going to make sure that those 68 teams are including some of the best teams, because I don't think you would argue that whoever finishes third in the ACC, I'd even go as far as fifth in the ACC, is not a more quality team than a lot of the regular season champions of some of those other leagues. So that's the other side of the argument, just to take that I think sometimes the same way. Maybe they should include everybody, but think about it, 351, all those venues would add a few games. And, yeah, it wouldn't be that much, but a lot more travel, a lot more venues. And I think the quality of the tournament at the beginning might get a little bit cloudy, where you have your number one seed Kansas playing whoever number 351 is, and I probably wouldn't figure it out that way. But I'm just arguing the other side just to be part of the conversation today.
No, I see your point there. I mean, it's not necessarily true. This is the first year that the Ivy League is going to have a tournament. And Princeton right now is undefeated. They've got 2 more games, and one of them against Harvard, who's second. I mean, they're up 2 games with 2 to play. But they're only including 4 teams in their tournament. So not every, and like I say, some get left out. I'm not talking about doing away with the conference tournaments, because I think those are great. I'm talking about dropping a couple of games at the beginning of the year and shortening it by a week up there. The cream is still going to rise to the top, but you've been part of these high school tournaments, and you know how excited people get when they can pull off an upset or come through. I just think it ends up being a lot of, and it is, like I say, it's money. You get the TV shows, you get the trips to the tournaments and all that for one more week of basketball, or a week and a half of basketball, where it could all go there. And then all these teams, then you don't have a Vermont being left out because they happen to get upset even though they ran the table in their tournament, or a Monmouth. They're still going to get their chance in the NCAA tournament. So the other counterpoint to your side is, by the time of that conference tournament, they've played each other, they know each other, and we know those games are just a little different when they go at it. But I don't see it changing anytime soon. The tournament has gone from 8 to 16 to 24 to 32 to 48 to 64 to 68. I'm sure they'll expand it at some time, but I'm not sure they'll include everybody, as there's also teams being added each year to Division I. So it'll be an exciting week for those other conferences that we don't get to hear much of, and an exciting week for the last week of these big conferences as they jockey for position and then head into their tournaments, all of which will be done by a week from this Saturday, and then the big dance starts with the play-in games that following Tuesday.
Yes, they do. So, hey, just to revisit something as we get here near the end of the season, and of course we're coming on our Mastodon minute here coming up, but remember that in November, I think it was November 10th, I picked the Fort Wayne Mastodons to make noise in March. I'm still sticking with that. They finished actually with the 6th seed in the Summit, and I didn't believe they would finish that low. But here's the reality. It doesn't matter, because even if they would have won the Summit, they would have had the number 1 seed, but still they would have had to win the tournament in order to get into the big dance. So they're in good shape because they finished 6th, but they're going to play the number 3 seed, Omaha, which, again, that's the middle of their standings is very, very close. So you could say, well, they almost tied with Omaha. So that's a winnable game. Beat the 3 seed, and then they're in the bottom of the bracket, which means if they win that, they'll probably play the number 2 seed, which I think is North Dakota State. And then if they win that, they'd have to play the number 1 seed, which I think is South Dakota. So the Mastodons, I'm still saying, are going to make noise in March. But, of course, starting, I think it's this coming Saturday is when they play that game against Omaha. They're going to have to win some games now, and hopefully them by playing a little bit more difficult schedule, playing the IU, of course, who they upset at the time, and going to Notre Dame. Hopefully they're a little bit more ready for that tournament, because I believe that tournament is out in the Dakotas, in the one that has the dome. That's where they actually play the Summit. So I'm sticking with the Mastodons. Who was your choice on November 10th to make some noise? One of those teams that's going to be the darling?
You are putting words in my mouth, sir. I didn't say March noise. I said a team to watch was Western Kentucky, which has had a pretty good season, not as far there. I haven't checked on them lately. They are in the middle of the pack in the Conference USA. They have a 13-16 record, but that's a team to watch. I think you'll hear more about them in the next couple of years as the coach has been able to get that straight. And there is one website that has your Mastodons at the highest percentage rate to win that tournament, even though they're a 6th seed. I don't know how they come to these, especially since they are playing in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But you'll never know what's going to go on until they play the games. So. Okay.
Yeah, I'll make one more point about the big dance. I was just reading some. It was a commentary on how America has changed and going back to our political discourse in this country, which I don't want to talk about. But it made a point that there are very few things in America anymore that everybody watches the same thing. Again, we used to all watch, 3 news channels. We don't do that anymore. There's all kinds of news channels, all kinds of websites. But it made the point, the Super Bowl is one thing that everybody in the country watches. And I think March Madness is maybe the other thing. Again, you could throw in the World Series maybe. But there are very few things that everybody in America focuses on the same thing. It's maybe why we've become so diverse. So, again, it's kind of good that sports does still bring us together to a common ground where we can all watch the same thing and argue and agree about the same things.
All right, let's go ahead. Stumpy, what do you got for me?
All right, I'm in kind of a low light area here. Let me find my. Okay, we're talking about the NCAA tournament, and we talked about seeding. Again, as always, I am going to relate my question to that. So, and again, as always, it's a tiered thing. I try to give you the easy softball. We'll move into a little bit tougher, and then I got the stumper at the end. But hey, and turn Google off. Okay, let's be fair here, Jeff. All right, here we go. This is your softball. This is easy, I think, and this is the modern NCAA history, which starts in most people's minds in 1985 when they went to 64 teams. So since 1985, who is I guess the way you'd say biggest number, highest seed, or does that be the lowest seed? How do we want to go with that? The lowest seed is right. That's the highest seed. We're talking about number 1, right?
Correct.
Okay, so what is the lowest seeded team to ever win a national championship? You should know that one.
To win it. I love how you give me the question and then you taunt me with it. You should know this. So if I get it wrong, I'm already in doo-doo. I would have to go probably with North Carolina State.
Ooh, that would be a good one. In fact, I just watched that 30 for 30 with Jimmy V, and that's got to be my favorite. But that's a good guess. But I'm going to tell you, and you're going to hit yourself in the head. I do this. I'm trying to help you out. I know your brain at your age needs exercise. So this is your exercise.
Answer?
Villanova, 1985, number 8.
That would have been my second guess.
Okay.
As well, but I just know that with the number of losses, and you got all this. I'm flying blind, pretty good.
I know.
I'll go through the talk. Anyway, next question.
All right, the next question. What are there are 3 teams here. One of them should be pretty easy. 3 teams who were the highest seed to make it to a final game. One of them easy.
3 teams that were the highest seed. You're talking about, North Carolina would be one. I believe they were a number 1 seed last year, weren't they?
No. Highest number. Lowest seed. I'm sorry.
I'm
confusing you. That's
they get to a final game. Okay.
The lowest seeds to make it to a final game, there's 3. One's very easy, right?
Well, I'm going to go with North Carolina State and Villanova because they both made it to a final game.
Villanova is correct.
And then I'll go with, probably something like, it's got to be one of the Cinderellas, like a George Mason or a Butler or somebody like that.
Okay, so you got 4 guesses. Butler is correct. In 2011, they were a number 8 seed, and, of course, they made it to the final game. And here's the one that was really tough and just happened recently, and you'll be reminded of this, is Kentucky in 2014 was a number 8 seed. And actually that national championship game, they lost to UConn, who was a number 7 seed. So that was kind of an unusual game. It kind of shows how, again, the lower seeds, I'm still confused how we're doing it, how much parity has taken place. Okay, here was the real stumper, although you're kind of on the, there are 3 teams who were the highest seeds, lowest seeds, biggest number, to make the Final Four. You already mentioned one of them. You probably remember that.
Then I'll go with George Mason.
George Mason was a number 11 in 2006. I'll give you a hint. In 2011, another number 11 made it to the Final Four.
Was that Wichita State's magical run?
I think you're thinking the right colors. We talked about this school a little bit today.
We talked about a lot of schools today.
Shaka Smart.
Oh, VCU. Oh, yeah.
In 2011, VCU. And this is the big stumper. Nobody will get. And so, listeners, if you got the answer to this one, you're on today, because this was the one that is very, very tough. I couldn't even come close. I don't even know if I remember this. In 1986, there was a number 11 seed who made it to the Final Four. Actually, I'll give you a hint, and I might not be right, but I think I'm right on this. A superstar NBA player, big personality, was on this team, I think.
In 86?
1986.
I don't know. I'm trying to think.
I might be wrong, but I think it's the answer's LSU. I think that's Shaq and Dale Brown. I may be wrong there, but I think that's when they snuck into the Final Four as a number 11 seed. I'll have to do some homework and make sure I'm correct on that one. But okay, so I'm going to give you a C today. Sorry, but some days you have good days and some days you don't.
And sometimes you just wear me out with the questions. I mean, Lord have mercy.
Well, I did my homework this week, so I was feeling bad about last week, not being ready.
Anyway, come and listen to us on Thursday, folks, when we have our Razorcast, which is all things about Xavier basketball. And we'll be back with you on Tuesday. We'll know those conference championships. We'll know those tournament champions. And we'll be heading into those, and we'll talk a little bit about who we think is going to be in the tournament. And before we go, just a couple quick tidbits. We want to do a shout-out to Mahershala Ali, who won the Best Supporting Actor award at the Oscars the other night, and he is the first Division I basketball player to ever win an Oscar. He played for St. Mary's in the 1990s, and, of course, they're in the top 25 now. They weren't during his time. Averaged 7 points and 4 rebounds as a senior with them. And last
what
week
movie was he in?
What movie? Moonlight, okay. Which also won the Best Picture award after that big mishap at the end of the Oscars.
Hey, could you imagine if that happened on Selected Sunday? They put a name up and they go, "Oh no, sorry, you are not getting in."
Sadly, it happens every year. You read about something at a college where they send out the wrong email, send the admit email to the denied email. So that would be something they'd have to fix. But you got to get it right, and that's what they did. And the people from La La Land were very gracious the other night when it happened. And last week we talked about the Miracle on Ice in 1960, but 1980, the first Miracle on Ice, because we don't remember, the United States has won the Olympic gold twice as amateurs. In 1960, they beat the Soviets in the semis and came back a day later to beat Czechoslovakia to win their first gold medal. That was in Squaw Valley, California. Okay, so lots of things going on, and we hope that you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week when we come back for another TrogCast.